It was a quiet Saturday afternoon in a suburban neighborhood when Karen Mitchell, a middle-aged woman with a penchant for control, peered through her kitchen window and saw 14-year-old Jamal Carter shooting hoops in his driveway. His basketball bounced rhythmically, the sound echoing faintly across the street. To Karen, it wasn't just a kid playing. It was a disruption, a threat, a reason to act. She didn't hesitate. She dialed 911, her voice trembling with manufactured urgency as she reported a suspicious black male loitering in her neighborhood. 5 minutes later, when Jamal's father, Dr. Marcus Carter, pulled into the driveway, Karen's world turned upside down. What unfolded wasn't just a confrontation. It was a reckoning that would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew. The day started like any other in the quiet, tree-lined streets of Oakwood Estates. Jamal, a lanky teenager with a quick smile and a love for basketball, was out in his driveway, dribbling and practicing free throws. He'd been at it for about 20 minutes, the ball thumping against the pavement, his sneakers squeaking as he moved. His family had moved into the neighborhood 6 months earlier, one of the few black families in a predominantly white area. Jamal didn't think much of it. He was just a kid doing what kids do, playing ball, enjoying the warm September sun, and thinking about the math homework he still hadn't started. Across the street, Karen Mitchell stood at her kitchen sink, washing dishes and watching Jamal through her window. She'd seen him before. Of course. He lived right there, in the 2-story house with the neatly trimmed lawn and the shiny SUV parked out front. But to Karen, Jamal wasn't just a neighbor's kid. He was an outsider, someone who didn't quite belong in her carefully curated world. She'd moved to Oakwood Estates for peace, for safety, for the kind of life where everyone knew their place. The basketball's steady thump grated on her nerves, each bounce feeling like a personal affront. She dried her hands, picked up her phone, and made the call. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked, her voice calm and professional. There's a young black male loitering in my neighborhood, Karen said, her tone sharp. He's been out there for a while, just hanging around, playing basketball. I don't feel safe. Can you send someone to check it out? The dispatcher asked for her address and a description of the suspect. Karen obliged. Her words clipped. He's maybe 14 or 15, wearing a red T-shirt and black shorts. He's on the driveway across from my house, number 47. I don't know him, and I don't think he lives here. The dispatcher noted the details and promised to send a patrol car. Karen hung up, satisfied, and returned to her window. She felt a small surge of pride. She was protecting her neighborhood, doing her part to keep things in order. She didn't know Jamal's name, didn't know his family, and didn't care to. To her, he was a problem to be solved. Meanwhile, Jamal kept playing, oblivious of the call that had just been made. He sank a three-pointer, grinning as the ball swished through the net. He was working on his form, trying to mimic the smooth release he'd seen on highlight reels of his favorite NBA players. School had been tough that week. Algebra was kicking his butt, and his history teacher had assigned a group project he wasn't thrilled about. But out here, with the ball in his hands, he felt free. The world made sense. 5 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled into the neighborhood, its presence subtle but unmistakable. The car slowed as it approached the Carter house, pulling up to the curb just as a sleek black BMW turned into the driveway. Jamal paused, the ball tucked under his arm, as he watched the police car. His stomach tightened. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but he'd heard enough stories from his dad, from his older cousins, to know that didn't always matter. He stood still, waiting, his eyes flicking between the cruiser and the BMW. The driver's door of the BMW opened, and Dr. Marcus Carter stepped out. He was a tall man in his early 40s, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, his hospital badge still clipped to his belt. Marcus was a pediatric surgeon at the local hospital, respected by colleagues and patients alike. He'd just finished a long shift, saving a 6-year-old girl's life after a complicated procedure. All he wanted was to get home, hug his son, and maybe catch the end of the game on TV. But as he saw the police car and the uncertain look on Jamal's face, his exhaustion gave way to a familiar, simmering alertness. "Jamal," Marcus called, his voice steady but firm. "You okay?" Jamal nodded, though his grip on the basketball tightened. "Yeah, Dad, I'm good." The police officer, a young man named Officer Ryan Delaney, stepped out cruiser. He was in his late 20s, with a crew cut and a cautious demeanor. He'd been on the force for 3 years, long enough to know that calls like this, vague reports of suspicious activity, often amounted to nothing. Still, he had a job to do. He approached Jamal, one hand resting lightly on his holster, not threatening but ready. "Afternoon," Officer Delaney said, nodding at Jamal. "We got a call about someone loitering in the area. Mind if I ask what you're doing out here?" Jamal's heart raced, but he kept his voice calm, just like his dad had taught him. "I'm just playing basketball, sir. I live here." Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding but not aggressive. "Officer, I'm Marcus Carter. This is my son, Jamal. We live at this address. Is there a problem?" Delaney glanced between father and son, his posture relaxing slightly. "Just responding to a call, sir. Someone reported a suspicious person in the neighborhood. Said they didn't recognize the individual playing basketball here." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his tone remained even. "Suspicious? My son's been shooting hoops in our driveway for the last half hour. He's 14. He lives here." "Who made the call?" Delaney hesitated, glancing at his notepad. "I don't have a name, sir. Just a resident on this street." Across the street, Karen watched from her window. Her curtains parted just enough to give her a clear view. She hadn't expected the police to arrive so quickly, and she certainly hadn't expected Jamal's father to pull up at the same moment. She saw Marcus talking to the officer, his posture calm but authoritative, and a flicker of unease crept into her chest. She hadn't thought this far ahead. Marcus turned to Jamal, his voice low but clear. "Go inside, son. I'll handle this." Jamal hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." He dribbled the ball once more, almost out of habit, then headed toward the front door, casting a quick glance at the officer before stepping inside. Marcus turned back to Officer Delaney. "I'd like to know who called this in, officer. My son wasn't doing anything wrong. He was playing basketball in his own driveway. If someone's got a problem with that, I'd like to have a conversation with them." Delaney shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I understand, Dr. Carter. I don't have the caller's information right now, but I can assure you we're just following protocol. We have to check out every call." "Protocol," Marcus repeated, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "You got a call about a black kid playing basketball, and you show up here like he's a threat. You think that's protocol? You think that's fair?" Delaney opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a voice cut through the air. "I made the call." Marcus and Delaney turned to see Karen Mitchell standing on her front lawn, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was in her mid-50s. "I made the call," Karen repeated, her voice louder now, though it wavered slightly. She stood on her front lawn, arms crossed, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. "I didn't know he lived here. I was just being cautious. You can't be too careful these days." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he took a step toward her, stopping at the edge of his driveway. "Cautious," he said, his voice low but carrying a weight that made Karen flinch. "You saw my son playing basketball in his own driveway, and your first thought was to call the police? You didn't think to come over, introduce yourself, maybe ask if everything was okay?" Karen's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. "I didn't know him. I've never seen him before. I was just looking out for the neighborhood." "Looking out for the neighborhood," Marcus echoed, his tone sharp now. "You've lived across the street from us for 6 months, Ms. Mitchell. You've seen my son out here before. You've seen me, my wife, our car. You didn't think to talk to us? You went straight to 911. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, her confidence faltering. I didn't mean any harm. I just thought." "You thought what?" Marcus interrupted, his voice rising just enough to make his point. "You thought a black kid playing basketball looked suspicious? You thought he didn't belong here? In his own home?" Officer Delaney stepped in, raising a hand. "Let's all take a step back here. Dr. Carter, I understand you're upset. Ms. Mitchell, it sounds like this was a misunderstanding. Maybe we can all just..." A misunderstanding? Marcus cut in, his eyes still on Karen. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is what happens when people make assumptions based on nothing but the color of someone's skin. My son wasn't breaking any laws. He wasn't causing trouble. He was playing basketball. And you called the police on him. Karen's face reddened further, but she didn't back down. I didn't know he was your son, she said, her voice defensive. I was just trying to keep things safe around here. You don't know what it's like, living alone, hearing all these stories on the news. Stories on the news? Marcus said, shaking his head. You mean the stories that paint kids like mine as threats? You mean the ones that make you clutch your purse when you see a black teenager walking down the street? Those stories. Karen flinched, her arms tightening around herself. That's not fair, she said. I'm not racist. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out, Marcus said. You didn't bother to meet us, to talk to us, to learn who we are. You saw a black kid and decided he was a problem. That's not caution, Ms. Mitchell. That's prejudice. Delaney cleared his throat, clearly eager to de-escalate. Dr. Carter, I think we've cleared up that there's no issue here. Your son's fine, and it sounds like Ms. Mitchell made an honest mistake. Maybe we can all just move on. Marcus turned to the officer, his expression unyielding. Move on? My son just had the police called on him for existing in his own front yard. You think he's just going to shake that off? You think I'm going to shake that off? Delaney looked down, clearly at a loss. I hear you, sir. I do. But there's no crime here, and I don't think Ms. Mitchell meant any harm. Marcus let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly but his eyes still locked on Karen. No harm, he said quietly. You know how many kids like Jamal don't get the chance to walk away from a call like this? You know how many times a misunderstanding turns into something else? I'm a doctor. I've seen what happens when these calls go wrong. I've stitched up kids who didn't do anything but be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked genuinely shaken. I didn't think about that, she stammered. I'm sorry. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You're sorry, he said finally, but sorry doesn't undo what you did. Sorry doesn't make my son feel safe in his own home. You need to think about that. Ms. Mitchell, you need to think about what your actions mean, not just to you, but to people you're so quick to judge. He turned to Officer Delaney. Are we done here? Delaney nodded quickly. Yes, sir. No further action needed. I'll file the report as a misunderstanding. Marcus gave a curt nod, then turned back to Karen. Next time you feel cautious, try talking to your neighbors first. You might be surprised what you learn. Without another word, he walked toward his front door, leaving Karen standing on her lawn, her face pale and her hands trembling. Officer Delaney returned to his cruiser, jotting a few notes before driving off. The street felt quiet again, the only sound of faint chirping of birds in the trees. Inside the Carter house, Jamal sat on the couch, his basketball resting beside him. He'd heard most of the conversation through the open window, and though he tried to play it cool, his hands were still shaking. Marcus sat down next to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You okay? Marcus asked, his voice softer now. Jamal nodded, but his eyes stayed on the floor. Yeah, I didn't do anything wrong. Dad, I was just playing. I know, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't about you. It's about her and people like her, who see what they want to see instead of what's real. Jamal looked up, his eyes searching his father's face. What do I do if it happens again? Marcus took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. You keep being you, Jamal. You keep playing basketball, going to school, chasing your dreams. You don't let people like that make you feel small. And you know I've got your back, always. Jamal nodded again, a small smile tugging at his lips. Thanks, Dad. Across the street, Karen stood in her living room, staring out the window at the now empty driveway. She felt a knot in her stomach, a mix of shame and defensiveness she couldn't quite untangle. She'd meant to do the right thing, hadn't she? She'd just been looking out for herself, for her neighborhood, But Marcus's words echoed in her mind, sharp and unyielding. She hadn't known Jamal was a son. She hadn't known he lived there. But why hadn't she? Why hadn't she ever bothered to find out? Over the next few days, the incident lingered in the neighborhood like a stubborn fog. Word spread quickly. Oakwood Estates was small and gossip traveled fast. Some neighbors sided with Karen, whispering about safety concerns and not knowing who's who. Others, especially those who'd met the Carters, were appalled. They stopped by to check on Marcus and Jamal, bringing casseroles and apologies, as if they could somehow make up for Karen's actions. Karen herself kept a low profile, avoiding her front yard and keeping her curtains drawn. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, wincing at Marcus's words, at the way he looked at her. She wanted to apologize again, properly this time, but every time she thought about walking across the street, her stomach twisted. What would she even say? How could she explain herself when she wasn't sure she understood her own actions? A week later, Jamal was back in the driveway, shooting hoops again. The ball's steady thump echoed through the street, just as it had before. This time, though, Karen didn't call anyone. She stood at her window, watching, her phone untouched on the counter. She saw Jamal sink a jump shot, saw him smile to himself, and for the first time, she noticed how young he looked. Just a kid playing basketball. She thought about Marcus's words, about the stories she'd heard on the news, the ones she let shape her view of the world. She thought about the Carters, living just across the street, and how she'd never once spoken to them before that day. She thought about what it must feel like to be Jamal, to have the police called on you for no reason at all. Karen didn't cross the street that day, or the next, but she started to pay attention. She noticed when Marcus left for work in the mornings, his hospital badge glinting in the sun. She noticed when Jamal's mom, Lisa, watered the flowers in her front yard, humming softly to herself. She noticed where the Carters' house looked just like hers, lived in, loved, a home. One evening, about 2 weeks after the incident, Karen saw Marcus outside, checking his mailbox. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to step out onto her porch. "Dr. Carter," she called, her voice shaky. Marcus turned, his expression neutral but guarded. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, nodding. Karen took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I owe you and Jamal an apology. I made a mistake, a big one. I didn't think about what I was doing, or how it would affect your son. I'm sorry." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "I appreciate that," he said, "but an apology's just a start. If you want to make this right, get to know us. Get to know your neighbors. That's how you keep a neighborhood safe, not by calling the police on kids." Karen nodded, her throat tight. "I will," she said softly. "I promise." Marcus gave her a small nod, then turned back to his mailbox. Karen stood there for a moment, watching him, then went back inside. It wasn't a resolution, not exactly, but it was something, a step, maybe, towards something better. For Jamal, life went on. He kept playing basketball, kept struggling with algebra, kept dreaming of the NBA. But he carried the memory of that day with him, a reminder of the world he lived in, and of the father who'd stood up for him when it mattered most. And for Marcus, it was another battle in a long war, one he fought not just for his son, but for every kid who deserved to feel safe in their own home. The neighborhood didn't change overnight. There were still whispers, still sidelong glances, still moments of tension. But there were also small shifts, a wave from a neighbor, a conversation at the mailbox, a basketball game that went uninterrupted. And for the Carters, that was enough for now. They kept living, kept loving, kept showing the world who they were one day at a time.